The party was at its peak. Laughter echoed throughout the room, the sound of music filled every corner and glasses clinked in carefree toasts. But my eyes were fixed on a scene that should have been impossible. In the center of the room, under the low, flickering light of the chandelier, my wife was dancing with another man. Not just any man. A stranger to me, but, from the way they looked at each other, not to her. His hands roamed her back with an intimacy I knew well. Fingers slid down to her waist, pulling her closer, and she didn't flinch. On the contrary. His lips curved into a smile that, until then, I thought was mine alone. My heart tightened in my chest, my hands became cold, and a feeling of numbness took over my body. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe properly. It was like I was watching a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every step, every look exchanged between the two, every muffled laugh from her, everything felt like a slow, cruel stab. How long had this been going on? When did she stop being mine and become his? Was it that week when you said you were working late? Or on that business trip from which you came back different, more distant? Or maybe, it was always happening, and I was the last one to notice. My mind was screaming to do something, anything. Going to them, tearing her away from that hug, confronting them both right there, in front of everyone. But my legs were stuck to the floor, as if they were made of concrete. The faces around me turned into indistinct blurs, the noise of the party reduced to an annoying buzz in the back of my mind. The entire world seemed to be spinning in slow motion except them. They were in perfect tune. As if I didn't exist. Then something inside me changed. A snap. A flash of clarity amidst the darkness of betrayal. I could feel some people's eyes on me, waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to do the obvious, a scene, a scandal, a rage. But no. No. If she wanted to humiliate me, if she wanted to make a fool of me in front of everyone, she was about to find out that I wasn't the man she thought she knew. A decision was born there, in the midst of that suffocating pain. I wouldn't just react. I would rewrite that story. Something that no one expected, something that would make that night memorable forever. That's when I approached, one step at a time, without rushing, feeling the adrenaline course through my veins. Time seemed to drag by as I crossed the room. My every step was a choice, a new direction. And then, when I was just a few meters away, her voice reached my ears. "Are you sure you want to do this here?" His laughter was the answer. A laugh of victory, from someone who believed they had already won. "He's not going to do anything," the man said, confidence dripping from each word. "Look at him, he's just watching." They were wrong. The pain turned into something more. Something cold, calculated. A plan began to form in my mind, something no one could have predicted. As the curious eyes turned to me, as the mouths whispered to each other, as my wife followed her lover's movements as if he were the only man in that room, I made a decision. Something that left everyone without a reaction. Something that would make my wife realize that while she thought she was in control of the game, she never realized that I could turn the tables at any moment. And when I opened my mouth, when I finally made my move, everyone held their breath. Because no one, not even her, could imagine what I was about to do. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is neither romanticized nor justified. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they carry an undeniable truth: betrayal destroys lives, families, and trust. The objective of these narratives is to show the devastating consequences of wrong choices and how, often, the traitor ends up paying a high price for their actions. Now, get ready to dive into an intense story, full of twists and raw emotions. A story that will move you. Take a deep breath, because what comes next is shocking. Night fell gently over the city, dyeing the sky with orange tones that gradually faded into the dark blue of the approaching dawn. The lights of the buildings reflected on the wet asphalt from the light drizzle that had continued to fall since late afternoon. Inside a room lit by elegant chandeliers, music filled the atmosphere, mixing with the lively voices and toasts that sounded among the guests. The event was one of the most anticipated of the year, bringing together important names, longtime friends and couples who had been part of the same social circle for years. In the middle of the party, walking between tables and greeting acquaintances with polite smiles, were Ethan and Sophia. Ethan was a man of commanding presence. Tall, impeccable posture, confident look. His suit fell perfectly over his broad shoulders, and his well-groomed beard reinforced his air of maturity. He was one of those men who exuded confidence, not because of his arrogance, but because of the way he carried himself, the way he looked into the eyes of whoever he was talking to, the way he seemed to have everything under control. It had always been like this, since I was young. He had grown up with the responsibility of running the family business and, over the years, he had learned that power lay in the way he dealt with people. He knew when to be tough, but also when to show kindness. With Sophia, kindness always won. Sophia was the type of woman who attracted attention without having to try. The burgundy dress fit her body impeccably, highlighting her pale skin and hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Her eyes sparkled under the light of the party, and the way she smiled seemed to mesmerize whoever was around. She had always been charismatic, sweet, but with a quiet strength that Ethan had admired since the day he met her. Together, they formed an admired couple. Not just because of their appearance, but because of the way they fit together, like two pieces that effortlessly complete each other. At least, that's how it all seemed. Their relationship had a solid history. They met when they were still young, and their involvement was almost immediate. Ethan, always so used to making strategic business decisions, felt disarmed by Sophia's simplicity. She didn't need artifices to charm him, she just had to be who she was. Before long, they were together, sharing moments, dreams, plans for the future. The marriage came naturally, and their life together followed a course that seemed perfect. Over time, they consolidated a comfortable life, an enviable social circle and a routine that, despite being predictable, worked well. But predictability can sometimes become a silent poison. The days became more automatic, romantic gestures became scarce. Not that the love had disappeared, but it had transformed into something different. Something calmer, more peaceful, but also more distant. Ethan dedicated himself intensely to his work, and Sophia, although she admired his determination, missed the days when he looked at her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. He had never complained openly. He had never demanded changes. She had just adapted, like so many other wives who learn to accept the inevitable changes of time. That night's party was one of the events Sophia had always enjoyed. I loved getting ready, I liked the energy of being surrounded by people, the lively conversations, the glasses always full. But that night, there was something different about her. Ethan noticed. He felt it in the small gestures, in the smiles that seemed vaguely rehearsed, in the gaze that frequently looked away. She looked beautiful, as always, but there was something about her that he couldn't decipher. Maybe tiredness. Perhaps just a reflection of the routine that had surrounded them for so long. He thought about asking if everything was okay, but hesitated. Maybe it was just in your head. As the hours progressed, the guests mingled in increasingly loose conversations. The champagne worked its magic, and the room was filled with loud laughter and dancing steps. Ethan, engaged in a business conversation, looked away for a moment and looked for Sophia. He didn't see her right away. He looked around, among the familiar faces, until his eyes finally found her. She was dancing. But not with him. His heart sped up for a moment, but he forced himself to keep his expression neutral. It wasn't a big deal. It was just a dance. She had always liked dancing, and he had never been the best partner in that regard. But then she noticed the way the man next to her was holding her. The way their bodies moved together, as if they shared a silent secret. Ethan stood still, watching, trying to rationalize what he saw. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a deep discomfort, a tightness in his chest that he didn't know how to name. Sophia had always been free, she had always had her space, and he had never needed to question anything. But now, seeing her there, dancing like that, with that man, something inside him seemed to move out of place. Time seemed to slow down. The surrounding voices became distant, faces lost focus. All that was left was that image, his wife in the arms of another. A smile he hadn't seen on her face for a long time. Ethan's body remained still, but his mind raced in directions he couldn't control. A whirlwind of questions, assumptions, memories. He thought about approaching, stopping the dance, taking Sophia by the hand and bringing her back to him. But something stopped him. He wanted to understand. I needed to understand. It was then that Sophia turned her face slightly, her eyes meeting his from across the room. She hesitated for a second, as if she had been caught doing something she shouldn't have been doing. But he didn't back down. He didn't move away. She just held his gaze for a moment, before looking away and continuing the dance. Ethan felt a weight settle in his chest. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. And he was about to find out where that night would take him. Ethan felt his fingers close involuntarily around the glass of whiskey he held. The ice clinked against the glass, the amber liquid swirling slightly. He was still standing there, in the same spot, but his mind was in a whirl. The room seemed to keep spinning around him, the voices kept echoing, the laughter, the toasts, the music. But nothing seemed real. It was all background to what he had just witnessed. To the way Sophia danced in another man's arms as if he wasn't there. As if he had never existed. He tried to convince himself that it was just a moment, a harmless dance, an ordinary interaction between acquaintances. But it wasn't. Something about that scene made it clear that it wasn't. The way the other man's fingers slid around her waist so easily, as if it were something familiar. As if it weren't the first time. And Sophia's look, that fleeting look before ignoring him again, as if she already knew he was there the whole time, as if she was waiting for his reaction. A knot began to form in Ethan's stomach. He swallowed hard, moving away from the counter a little and looking away. I needed air. I needed to think. He walked around the room, greeting acquaintances mechanically, without really registering the words that were said to him. He felt out of place, as if he were in a dream he couldn't wake up from. His eyes, however, always returned to the same point. To where his wife still was. To where that man still was. He didn't recognize him. At least, not right away. Which made everything even worse. Ethan knew practically everyone there, but that man was not part of his circle. Who was he? Where did it come from? How did Sophia know him? Too many questions, too few answers. He tried to rationalize. Perhaps it was an old acquaintance of hers, someone he had simply never noticed. Maybe he was exaggerating. But his instinct said otherwise. And Ethan had always trusted his instinct. Minutes passed. The dance ended. The man said something in Sophia's ear, and she smiled. Then they walked away, he took a glass, she followed to a group of friends, as if nothing had happened. But it happened. And Ethan needed to understand. He waited. Observed. Every little movement. Every exchange of glances. Until something happened that shattered any doubt he was still trying to maintain. Sophia discreetly took out her cell phone, checked something on the screen and started walking towards the side exit of the room, away from the main activity. And he followed her. He crossed the room with calculated, discreet steps. I didn't want to attract attention, I didn't want anyone to know that something was wrong. At least, not yet. Sophia walked out the door, and he waited a few seconds before doing the same. The cool night air hit his face when he finally stepped outside. The garden was spacious, lit by low lights and decorated with small tables for those who wanted a more private moment. But she wasn't in any of them. His heart pounded in his chest when he heard a muffled sound coming from the side of the building. Voices. Steps. He moved silently, hiding behind one of the columns, and that was when he saw it. Sophia was not alone. She was with him. With the same man who held her like that on the dance floor. But now there were no more disguises, no more restrictions. Her body was pressed against his, her arms around his neck, and his hands held her waist with the same intimacy that Ethan had noticed before. They were close. Very close. And then it happened. The kiss. Ethan couldn't move. He couldn't react. It was as if his body had frozen there, while the world around him collapsed into silence. Every fiber of his being wanted to lunge forward, wanted to rip her away, wanted to scream, wanted to demand answers. But all he did was stand there. Attending. It was real. The betrayal he never imagined, never considered, was happening before his eyes. His wife, the woman who had been by his side for years, the woman he loved, who built a life by his side, was in the arms of another man. Kissing him. Touching it. And worst of all, she didn't seem sorry. The kiss was long, lingering, intimate. As if it were already part of something bigger, as if it were the continuation of something that hadn't started that night. When they walked away, Sophia smiled, and the man said something that made her laugh softly. She touched his face, affectionately. And then he checked the watch on his wrist. Ethan knew what that meant. She would go back inside. I would go back to the party. I would return to him, as if nothing had happened. Anger burned in his chest, mixed with a kind of pain he had never experienced before. His blood boiled, his muscles tensed. He could do something. I should do something. But no. Not now. He took a deep breath, forcing himself back. His heart was hammering inside his chest, his hands were shaking, but he couldn't lose control there. Not yet. He left the place silently, going around the garden until he returned to the hall. He didn't even notice how many people he greeted along the way, he didn't even register the looks or smiles around him. All he could feel was that weight, that crushing truth that had just unfolded before his eyes. And then, as if fate was laughing at him, Sophia appeared in the distance. Walking back inside. She approached, fixed her hair, took a glass from the tray of a waiter who was passing by. Her eyes met his. And she smiled. A rehearsed smile, the same one she used when she wanted to appear calm. But now Ethan knew the truth. Now, that smile meant something completely different. And then, a single certainty took hold of him. That night wasn't over yet. And when it came to an end, everything would be different. Ethan felt his heart pounding in his chest, but his expression remained cold, impassive. Since leaving the party, he had driven aimlessly through empty streets, the muffled sound of tires on asphalt echoing in the silence of the early morning. The lump in his throat became more and more unbearable, but he refused to give in. Not that night. Not until I understood what was really happening. When he finally stopped the car in front of his own house, he stayed inside the vehicle for a moment, his hands firmly on the steering wheel. The place where he built his life, where he shared moments with Sophia, now seemed like just an empty space, a stage for a story that no longer belonged to him. He got out of the car, taking a deep breath before pushing the door open and getting in. The house was dark, but the dim light in the kitchen revealed that Sophia had already arrived. She was there, standing next to the counter, a glass in her hands, her eyes fixed on him as soon as she entered. His gaze, once so easy to read, was now an enigma. Perhaps a mix of guilt and apprehension. Maybe just indifference. He walked towards her, feeling the weight of silence build between them. For a moment, all he wanted to do was ask. Demand answers. Scream. But the anger was no longer an uncontrollable outburst. It was something much worse. It was a slow fire, burning inside, consuming every bit of trust that had ever existed between them. She broke the silence first. You didn't say anything at the party, her voice was low but firm. Not a word. Ethan smiled sideways, a humorless smile, without any trace of lightness. What did you expect me to do? Sophia looked away for a moment, as if searching for an answer that wasn't so obvious. I didn't want it to be like this. He let out a dry laugh, running a hand over his face. Didn't you want it to be like this? How exactly did you want it to be, Sophia? Should I have stood there, cheering you on as you danced in another man's arms? She closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the impact of those words. Ethan. He approached, his jaw tense, his voice thick with something that couldn't just be anger. How long has it been? Sophia pressed the glass between her fingers, hesitantly. Does it matter? He felt something break inside him. Does it matter? Are you asking if it matters? I saw you in his arms, I saw how he held you, how he kissed you. Do you really think I don't need to know? She let out a sigh, setting the glass aside. 6 months. Ethan felt a bitter taste in his mouth. 6 months. Half a year. Long enough for it to not just be a passing mistake, but a choice. 6 months, he repeated, as if he needed to process those words. While I was here, while I thought we'd just fallen into a routine, you were with him. Sophia crossed her arms, as if wanting to protect herself from something invisible. I never planned this. I didn't wake up one day and decide to cheat on you. It happened. He laughed in disbelief. It happened. Like a stumble. Like a car accident. Her eyes filled with something undefined. You don't understand. Ethan moved closer, feeling her breathing falter. Then make me understand. Explain to me how the woman who slept next to me all these years could give herself to someone else as if nothing between us meant anything. She hesitated. I was unhappy. That sentence was like a direct blow to the chest. Unhappy, he repeated, feeling each syllable stick in his mind. Sophia took a deep breath, her eyes locking with his. You became a stranger inside our house. Always working, always distant. I tried, Ethan. I tried to reach you, tried to make you notice that I was still here. But you never noticed. He blinked a few times, feeling the weight of each word. So the solution was to look for another man? She swallowed hard. It wasn't something I wanted, but he listened to me. He was there. Ethan closed his eyes for a second, before slowly exhaling. And who exactly is he? Sophia hesitated, and in that moment, he knew. I knew it before she even opened her mouth to respond. It's someone you know. Ethan's stomach dropped, but he held his ground. Say the name. She looked away. Eric. The name hit like a punch. Eric. Your best friend. The man he considered a brother. The air in the room seemed to disappear. Ethan felt his legs get heavy, but he stood firm. You are saying that for 6 months, while I blindly trusted you and him, you two were together. Sophia couldn't respond immediately. EU. He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. How it was. Did you laugh at me while you were together? Did they make plans? He would come here, sit at our table, and then go to bed with you. Sophia closed her eyes tightly. It wasn't about you, Ethan. He took a step forward, his voice filled with contained fury. Everything was about me. Silence stretched between them. Ethan felt something pulsing inside him, something about to explode. I trusted you too. I trusted Eric more than anyone outside this house. And now, it all makes sense. Sophia's eyes widened. What do you mean? Ethan licked his lips, looking away. He was always around. Always ready to give advice, to tell me what to do. Always so worried about me, about my marriage. Now I understand. Her eyes filled with tears. I never wanted to hurt you. He laughed again, and now there was something dangerous about that laugh. But he did it. Sophia looked at him, begging for something that even she didn't seem to know what it was. Ethan. He stared at her for a long moment, and then took a deep breath. He finished. Her chin trembled. What are you going to do? He didn't respond. He just turned, walking towards the door. But something inside him already knew. The night wasn't over yet. And when it was over, no one would emerge unscathed. Ethan walked out the door without looking back. The night was colder now, or maybe it was just the emptiness that settled inside him. Each step towards the car was heavy, as if dragging with him the wreckage of a life that, until a few hours ago, he thought was his. His mind was buzzing with the revelation, and the anger was still pulsing, intense, controlled only by the instinct that there was more to do. The betrayal didn't just come from Sophia. Eric. The name echoed in his head like poison. His best friend, his lifelong brother, the man with whom he shared secrets, achievements, frustrations. Now, he knew that while he trusted him, while he shared his pains and weaknesses, Eric was there, listening, advising, knowing that, deep down, everything was just a lie. How come he never noticed? How could someone so close hide something so dirty? Your car started down the street almost automatically. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but his instinct had already mapped out his destination. He needed to see Eric. I needed to look into that man's eyes and hear from him the truth that Sophia didn't have the courage to tell. Arriving at the building where his friend lived, he got out of the car without hesitation. He climbed the stairs with firm steps, his fists clenched, his entire body taken by a corrosive adrenaline. He knocked hard on the door. Seconds later, the door opened, and there he was. Eric. For a moment, the two just stared at each other. Ethan saw the surprise in the other's eyes, the small hesitation, as if he didn't know whether or not he should smile. Ethan, what are you doing here? Eric's tone was careful, measured. A play on words, as it always had been. But now, Ethan saw everything differently. I know. The two words were enough to make the other man stiffen. Eric blinked, and his face closed quickly, as if his mind was already calculating the possibilities. What do you know? Ethan took a step forward, forcing Eric to retreat into the apartment. 6 months, his voice was low, filled with something he could barely contain. You. And Sophia. Eric's reaction was imperceptible to anyone who didn't know the man well. But Ethan knew. He saw the slight tense in his jaw, the way his chest rose faster for a second before he let the air out slowly. I can explain. The explosion came before Ethan realized it. Explain what? His voice resounded throughout the apartment, echoing off the walls. He charged forward, pushing Eric against the wall. Explain how you came into my house, ate at my table, laughed with me while sleeping with my wife. Eric raised his hands in a defensive gesture, his gaze fixed on his. I never wanted this to happen, Ethan. So how did it happen? Did you trip and fall on her bed? The silence between them was dense, heavy. Eric closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to find a justification that didn't sound so disgusting. I can't change what happened. But I never wanted to hurt you. Ethan laughed, a bitter, almost cruel sound. You never wanted to hurt me. You were the only person I trusted besides her, Eric. If there was anyone who should tell me the truth, it was you. I tried. The words came out in a whisper, but they carried a weight Ethan hadn't expected. Tried what? Eric ran a hand through his hair, eyes darting to the floor for a second before looking at him again. I tried to get away. But Sophie. Her name on the other man's lips was the final straw. Ethan charged forward once more, and this time, anger turned into action. His hand found Eric's shirt collar, pulling him tight. Don't you dare blame her. Eric didn't resist. He just looked at him, and for the first time, Ethan saw something he didn't expect. Repentance. Not the superficial kind, not a ready-made excuse, but something true. I have no excuses. I destroyed the trust you had in me, and I know I will never get that back. But if there's one thing I can tell you, it's that Sophia. Ethan let go of the other, pulling away abruptly. I don't want to hear her name coming out of your mouth. Eric swallowed. I just want you to know that nothing that happened was planned to hurt you. Ethan looked at him for a long moment before letting out a hollow laugh. That doesn't change anything. He turned to leave, but before leaving, he took one last look at Eric. You lost everything. And then he left, without looking back. The night seemed colder now. The wind cut into his skin as he walked back to the car. But inside him, something was finally clear. He was no longer the man who had walked into that party that night. He was no longer the man who believed in unconditional love, in unwavering loyalty. Now, he was someone who knew the truth. And I was ready to move on. Dawn advanced slowly, weighed down by the weight of everything that had happened. Ethan drove slowly, without a certain destination. The noise of the engine was the only sound that filled the suffocating silence of the car. His mind was spinning, trying to absorb everything he had heard, everything he had been forced to face. There were no more doubts, no more room for false interpretations. The betrayal was there, raw, indisputable, and the worst of all was that it had come from where he least expected it. He stopped the car on a less busy street and turned off the engine. He leaned his head against the steering wheel, closed his eyes, trying to find a thought that wouldn't take him back to that night. But all he saw was Sophia's face, the hesitation in her eyes before admitting the truth. Eric's look, the confession that seemed to drag away any shred of dignity that still remained between them. The bitter taste of humiliation was stuck in his throat, and he knew that nothing he said or did would change what had already been destroyed. The phone vibrated on the dashboard. He didn't need to look to know who it was. Sophia. It was clear that she would try to talk to him, try to reverse the irreversible, find words that might ease the devastation they had caused. But what words would those be? What could be said now that would erase what he had seen, what he had heard, what he had felt? The phone vibrated again. Then once more. He picked up the device, looked at the screen and, for a moment, almost answered. But no. There was nothing more to be said. He hung up the phone, tossing it onto the passenger seat, and let out a long sigh. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. He didn't know. Time seemed to have no meaning anymore. When he finally started the car again, the only thing he was sure of was that he couldn't go home. Not that house. No more. He took a different route, heading to a place that, until then, he had never really considered his refuge. But now it seemed like the only place I could breathe without feeling like I was sinking. He arrived at the apartment of an old friend, someone who was not part of the same circle of betrayal and lies that now surrounded his life. Someone he knew he could trust. He knocked on the door and waited. When it opened, he saw the surprised look on the man in front of him, and it took him a second before he realized that something was very wrong. Ethan. Dude, what happened? Ethan ran his hands over his face, letting out a dry, humorless laugh. I need a place to stay. The friend didn't ask anything at that moment, just made space for him to enter. Ethan walked to the couch and threw himself on it, feeling the weight of tiredness overcoming the anger, the pain, the disgust. You don't need to tell me now, but the way you are, this has to do with Sophia, doesn't it? Ethan didn't respond immediately. He just stared at the ceiling, feeling the muscles in his face tense. She betrayed me. The words came out like poison that burned in the throat. The friend was silent for a moment before letting out a long sigh. Drugs. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to organize his thoughts. And it wasn't with just anyone. It was with Eric. The silence that came after was even heavier. I don't believe. Ethan laughed again, lifelessly. I didn't even believe it. But now there is nothing left to doubt. He didn't know exactly how long he stayed there, sunk on the couch, trying to find some logic in what was illogical. His friend just stayed by his side, without forcing him to speak, just letting him process everything. Hours later, as the sun was beginning to appear over the horizon, Ethan finally made a decision. He wouldn't be stuck with that. He would not allow himself to be dragged into the chaos he did not create. He picked up the phone, took a deep breath, and this time, he didn't ignore the incoming call. "Where are you?" Sophia's voice sounded anxious, full of emotion. "It doesn't matter. Please, we need to talk." He closed his eyes for a moment before responding. "No more talking, Sophia." She was silent for a few seconds. "Ethan, I don't want it to end like this." He laughed, humorlessly. "But it's over." She took a deep breath on the other end of the line. "I know I hurt you, but no, Sophie. You didn't hurt me. You destroyed everything." Her silence said more than any words. "I just want to understand, what happens now?" Ethan looked at the horizon, at the new day that was dawning before him. "Now, I move on." He hung up the call, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. That was it. Now was the beginning of something new. Something he still didn't know exactly what it would be like. But one thing was certain. He wouldn't go back. The cold morning wind cut into Ethan's face as he walked leisurely through the almost empty streets. He had left his friend's apartment without giving much explanation, just saying that he needed time to process everything. In fact, he knew that time alone would not resolve the situation. There was no solution. There was no fix. There was only the inevitable, moving forward. His phone rang again, but he didn't answer. I already knew who it was. Since the last call, Sophia had tried a few more times, sending short messages, some asking to talk, others simply saying she was sorry. He wouldn't answer. There was nothing she could say now that would make any difference. He walked to a cafe he used to frequent in times when his life seemed balanced. He sat next to the window, watching the discreet movement of people starting their day. A waiter approached and he ordered a strong coffee. I needed to keep my mind focused. The warm, bitter aroma of the drink brought some momentary comfort, but his mind wouldn't stop. He thought about what would come next. The marriage was over. There was no going back. He needed to deal with the separation, with the division of assets, with the exposure that would inevitably come. People would comment. Friends would ask questions. And most of all, there was Eric. The ex-friend. He knew that, at some point, he would have to face this situation in a practical way. But for now, the only thing I wanted was distance from it all. He picked up his phone and typed a single message to Sophia. You will receive the divorce papers soon. I hope this makes the process easier. There is nothing more to be said. Before he could regret it, he sent it. Soon after, he blocked her number. He took a deep breath. That was it. There was no more contact. He paid for the coffee and left, returning to the car he had left parked a few blocks away. He drove slowly, watching the city pass by through the window, and then something inside him made him change his path. A strange impulse, perhaps an unconscious desire to end it once and for all. Before he could think better, he parked in front of the office where Eric worked. He stood still for a few seconds, deciding whether or not he should enter. And then, without hesitating any longer, he got out of the car and walked to the entrance. The room was silent when he walked through the glass doors. The receptionist looked up and opened her mouth to say something, but he didn't wait. He walked straight down the hall, ignoring the stares of the employees, and opened the door to Eric's office with a firm movement. The other man sat behind the desk, his expression of surprise quickly turning into something between discomfort and guilt. He stood up slowly, as if trying to gauge the situation. Ethan. Ethan closed the door behind him, crossing his arms. I just came to make one thing clear. Eric took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. I imagine. Ethan ignored the response. I will never forgive what you did. Neither you nor her. But I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to tell you that from now on, you're just a stranger to me. Don't look for me. Don't try to justify yourself. You made the choice you made. Now deal with the consequences. Eric seemed to swallow hard, his shoulders tense. I don't expect your forgiveness. Ethan laughs bitterly. Good, because you never will. He turned to leave, but Eric stepped forward. Ethan, I just want you to know that it was never about hurting you. Ethan stopped, his hand on the doorknob. Wasn't it? Because it sounds like you two did a great job on this. Eric was silent. Just forget that I exist, concluded Ethan before leaving. He walked back to the car, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't peace, exactly. But it was the end of something. The end of a cycle that should have ended a long time ago. He drove aimlessly, until he stopped near a park where he used to go years ago. He got down and walked through the trees, feeling the cold air calm his thoughts. He didn't know exactly what would come next. But I knew I wouldn't look back. Time passed, but Ethan never felt like he truly healed. Sophia and Eric's betrayal had marked something deep inside him, a wound that, even as the months passed, still throbbed from time to time. He had moved on, as he promised himself that morning, but some nights were still filled with memories, with images that he couldn't erase. The divorce process had been quick. Sophia didn't dispute anything. She accepted all the conditions, signed the papers without question and disappeared from his life. There were no goodbyes. Just silence. He sold the house. The place that had once represented the construction of a future for two was now just a reminder of what had been destroyed. He moved to a smaller, simple apartment, but it carried something he had lost a long time ago, the feeling of a fresh start. The feeling that, for the first time in years, he was master of his own life. Sophia, on the other hand, never got used to the weight of her own choices. At first, she believed that Ethan would at some point forgive her. That the initial pain would pass and that perhaps, even without becoming a couple again, they could rebuild something, even if it was a friendship. But he soon realized that he had been mistaken. He never looked for her again. Never responded to messages. He never gave any sign that one day he would be able to look at her without contempt. She tried to go with Eric, because it seemed like the only natural path to take. But guilt hung over them like a shadow. Conversations started to get shorter, meetings less frequent. And then one day, Sophia looked at Eric and realized what she might have known all along: he wasn't Ethan. It never would be. The man for whom she had traded her marriage, her stability, her entire life, now seemed small, irrelevant. And that's where everything fell apart. Eric tried to hold on to something that was already doomed. He begged, asked them to give her a chance, tried to convince her that they could still be happy. But Sophia knew the truth. She didn't love him. Never loved. And what once seemed like an exciting adventure was now just a string of mistakes that she would never be able to escape. They separated. But, contrary to what I imagined, the end with Eric did not bring relief. Just a bigger void. A hole that not even time seemed capable of filling. The world around her seemed to go on normally, but she didn't. It was as if she was trapped in her own regret, reliving every wrong choice that had brought her here. Eric, in turn, tried to rebuild his life, but he carried a weight that he couldn't get rid of. Ethan was more than a friend. He was a brother, someone who had always helped him, who had trusted him without hesitation. And now, every time he looked in the mirror, he saw the worst version of himself. People around noticed. The work began to fall apart. The looks of professional colleagues stopped being respectful and became distant. He was no longer the successful and admired man he once was. Now, he was just a traitor. Ethan never knew what really happened to the two after he went his way. He never tried to find out. To him, they were dead. Just memories that, little by little, were disappearing. He had promised himself that he wouldn't let the past define him. That I would find something new, something true. And he found it. Life took him to unexpected places. New friendships emerged, opportunities he never would have noticed before opened up before him. But the most important thing came when he least expected it. It was in a cafe, on a random afternoon, that he met her. A banal meeting, an apology for a spilled coffee, a sincere smile that brought something he hadn't felt in a while, lightness. He no longer believed in love in the same naive way as before, but there, at that moment, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he could try again. Time did its work. The pain didn't disappear completely, but it remained in the past, where it should be. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan looked forward without the weight of betrayal. And now, all that was left was the future. Comment below what you thought of this story. Your opinion is very important. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. Here, betrayal will never be romanticized. The consequences are real and they always arrive. Until next time.